Nobody knows where they are and when they're on and so forth. Well, true, but, well, wait a minute. EPA also regulates millions of other things. They're called vehicles, and they don't know where they are and when they're run, how they're run either, and yet they use statistical analyses and models and assumptions and penetration figures to work numbers into SIPs. Why can't we do that with efficiency? There's some other simple ways too. Many PUCs that have utility-sponsored demand-side management efficiency programs, if a program's been done over and over again, they don't go to quite such a heavy evaluation, measurement, measurement, evaluation, and verification. Thank you. EM and V. The acronyms get so deep in the air world, we just live with them. We don't bother translating. Why can't we have deemed, so what they do in those circumstances, they have deemed reductions. You do this program, you install this many bulbs, we'll deem you as having achieved this much reduction. Why can't, reduction in energy. Why can't we do the same thing with reduction in emissions? There's some assumptions you have to make with that. What was the system average emissions or whatnot, but it can be done. You know, this is a case where you can really let excellent get in the way of the good. There's other things you can do. EPA has what's called the AP42 emission factors, which is sort of a menu, and the better your data, the more credit you get. It could do something similar for energy efficiency, or it has mobile source models. Why can't it create models for efficiency as well? You know, in pops your inputs and out pops your emission reductions. They've even taken some steps in that direction. They haven't just credentialed them yet as qualifiable for 111D plan compliance. And remember, EPA has more flexibility under 111D than they do under 110. Everything isn't scripted in the Act like it is under 110. So they should be able to do this stuff readily. States should also consider joining together with their colleagues in other regions. The larger the market area, of course, we all know, the likely the more cost opportunities exist, so lower costs will be, more compliance opportunities exist, so lower costs will be. It might be wise, for example, to try to align your state partners with your electricity balancing area, your RTO, if you have it, or balancing area, if not. Many states don't want to go jump in bed whole hog with another state or other states. It's complex, it's political, et cetera. But some are, and notably the West, are thinking about, well, couldn't we all just agree on, say, renewable energy, and we'll measure it the same way, we'll track it the same way, we'll count it the same way. Couldn't we do likewise with efficiency? So the Western states are already breaking that trail, and a lot of that infrastructure already exists. As many of you know, there are strong REC markets, renewable energy certificates, which are a commodity used for meeting renewable portfolio standards in the states. That tracking system is already pretty healthy on a national basis, and there's very little that has to be done to make it an efficiency and renewable tracking system. Uh-oh, I'm getting some message. I hope I didn't do that more, Emery. Good, he didn't blow up. Quick. On federal enforceability, something I should raise because that's caused a lot of attention. You know that a lot of folks have said EPA wants to come in, at least in PUC commissioners are quite concerned about EPA coming in and taking over their efficiency programs. I think you all know that vertebrae inside the Beltway here. Could EPA do that? Would EPA do that? Has EPA ever done that? Maybe, and no, and no. What actually happens is EPA determines that you have a deficiency and notifies the state, gives the state the opportunity to correct that deficiency, and then if it doesn't or can't, EPA can implement its federal plan. It doesn't come in and run your plans. Sue Tierney's fond of pointing out when she was Environment Commissioner in Massachusetts, there was a 20-year saga of EPA of the state of Massachusetts not succeeding with its plans, and EPA still didn't come in and put the hammer down and run its programs. And that all, by the way, is what happens under 110. We just said 111 is even more flexible than that. So how likely is it, do you think? Not very. What will the federal plan look like? Another big area of interest? I don't know either. Right? Nobody except maybe somebody inside the agency does. What we do know is that the states will relinquish their Alphonse and Gaston rights. Right? They won't have first crack. And EPA, we also know, is freed from adherence to the building blocks. You'd use the building blocks, set the target, end of story, I got the target. Now I can do what I want because you said you didn't want to do it. You just said no. Well, that's interesting. EPA is unlikely to do a different plan for every state, right? It's likely to develop a federal plan and implement it in the states. Like maybe, say, a mass-based cap-and-trade system? So could it be that EPA is being accused of wanting to do a mass-based cap-and-trade system and just say no states would drive it toward that outcome? That might be a backfire that the forces suggesting just say no might not have anticipated. There's numerous other issues. What's going to happen to the glide path, treatment of nuclear units, treatment of renewables and efficiency, baseline, safety valves. We could talk about those if they're of interest, but I don't want to do so alone. But whatever you do, expect that all the answers will occur, be clear in the final rule. EPA is trying to do this on a schedule. You all know the reasons for that are multiple. No one's ever done it before. There will be plenty of questions after EPA issues the final rule. So the key takeaways for you: recognize that 111D is not a SIP, right? Everybody repeat after me, not a SIP. Leave this room saying not a SIP. That's your new mantra. Think outside the building blocks. Help your states think integrated in terms of these multiple benefits so they don't come back at you with ozone and come back at you with PM. You get it all at once. Think regional. Think least cost. You notice in these discussions, not a whole lot of people are thinking least cost. There are opportunities for lower cost options, mostly efficiency. And then finally, to just paraphrase JFK, don't ask EPA what it needs to be, right? Ask what you want it to be and submit that. So thanks very much. I hope we have a good dialogue from here.
Thanks so much. Well, we've had two great presentations in terms of looking at so many of the issues around 111B and D under the Clean Power Plan. And let's open it up for any questions or comments that you may have. Take advantage of having these guys here. Okay, and please identify yourself. Okay.
I'm Ivy Main with the Virginia chapter of the Sierra Club. Mr. Berg, you mentioned that enforcement would begin in 2020. Can you tell me what would enforcement look like? I mean, presumably you're enforcing against the plants, but if you've got a recalcitrant state, what would happen?
It's a very good question. I don't know that there's a good answer to it. Compliance under the existing proposed plan. Compliance under the existing proposed plan is anticipated to begin in 2020. Section 111D doesn't spell out what the penalties would be for non-compliance. So what would enforcement look like? I imagine it would be something similar to what you see with SIPs, which is an effort to cooperate for a long period of time. And there's no ability to withhold funds or anything like that. So I'm not quite sure. Maybe somebody else has an answer to that.
My only contribution on that was we might have some insights as a result of when the federal plan is proposed, which is supposed to be done at the same time as the 111D rule is finalized. So I don't know if EPA will give us more insights into that issue at that time, but that would be the next place I'd look.
Hi, Tom Tyler from the Environmental Council of the States. Thank you to you both. The Supreme Court, or the courts, have upheld EPA for the mercury and air toxics rule and for the transport rule. And people I know are looking at those and thinking, is there any indication of how EPA will fare for the 111D Clean Power Plan? And I know there was language from the courts, and I don't remember which case it was from, saying, yeah, we're going to uphold this, but EPA shouldn't take vague parts of the Clean Air Act, and it was something like that are narrow, and drive a truck through them. I think a lot of people read that to be at least one judge and maybe more indicating you were looking at 111D. Can you remind us which case that was from, who said it, and if we should be looking at that as an indication of how EPA might fare when all of this litigation comes out right after the rule goes final? Thanks.
I believe that that's UARG case, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong on that. I believe it's Justice Scalia. I believe that the issues are distinguishable, that they're different. The issue in that case was whether, that was being referenced at that point, was whether EPA could start to regulate facilities that it does not currently regulate, and whether these facilities that emit 100,000 tons per year of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions could now be required to get prevention of significant deterioration and Title V operating permits, whereas previously they don't, because they didn't meet, or they don't meet the existing thresholds. So that would be an expansion of EPA's authority to facilities that currently are not under EPA's, under these programs. That's not what you're looking at under Section 111D. You're not looking at an expansion of EPA authority, permitting authority to any facilities that aren't currently under their jurisdiction. And to the extent that there's a concern, and I think that there is a concern that EPA will try and go beyond the fence line. And it may be that that reference in part gives voice to that concern, that EPA will make some effort to try and directly regulate the state PSCs or PUCs, or they will try and implement energy efficiency, renewable energy programs directly in the states, which would be an expansion of EPA authority. They don't do that. I myself believe that EPA is well aware that that would raise legal problems, so I don't see that as particularly likely. But.
So this is Scott. Thanks. Sean Kimmel with Congressman Dan Lipinski's office. So there's some discussion about the amount of flexibility that's been offered to the states and how that's an opportunity but also a challenge. Can you discuss the resources that will be available to states to help them in making those decisions?
Well, I think that's another unanswered question. I think that EPA has indicated that they are preparing to have some kind of fund, which, if not directly targeted for that purpose, is only slightly circuitous to be helpful in that regard. But I'm really not on the front lines of the financial side of that. So I think they're aware of it. I think ideally they will be doing the kind of modeling that will assist and be pretty generalizable for states. But certainly they have to get past this final first. One of the problems is that 111D, what it does contain statutorily is pretty thin, as I indicated, because the rest is less flexible. But what it does contain is some reasonably tight time frames. State air directors are used to submitting SIPs over 2 and 3 and 4 year periods, and 111D calls for a 1 year period, which EPA stretched, if you work with other states, to a 2 year period, and figured out some waiver or some emergency provision that could have a 3rd year extension. But that's not just EPA's imaginings. That's actually part of 111D. So they're aware of it. I trust that they'll work on it, but I actually don't know specifically how. Sorry.
Hi, Paul Donahue-Villette from the Department of Energy. So I know that 111D implementation plans are not SIPs, but is there a way that you can say how EPA will evaluate plans that are submitted, what sort of stringency they'll apply, and what things might trip states up when in what they apply for a plan?
I think the answer is no, with increasing vehemence. No, they haven't provided much guidance on that other than the simple things like list of and whatever you're doing. But what criteria they're going to use to evaluate, especially where states depart from the rate-based approach. So if they're using a mass-based approach, they have to do a conversion, EPA's prescribed a couple of ways to do that, but there's a lot of data issues there, and states may differ from EPA's, initial simple interpretations. So the short answer on the first question about how EPA, what criteria they will use, I think is another thing we need to wait for the final rule. The other two are even less certain. I guess I would just add that, and are likely not all to be totally answered. I think the first one, criteria, will be answered reasonably well in the final rule. The others, not so much, probably. There'll be an evolution here, sort of a case law character to it, even though it's more regulatory proceeding than case law, but something of that nature.
I think I would just add that I think the standard will be something akin to adequacy. That will be the legal standard, and what is an adequate plan will be